both design and code, how to build apps, how to design apps, and how to use these new techniques in the industry that is going to make your life so much easier, both for you, for your developers, for your team, for your designers, and hopefully we can combine the two worlds together. So just a little note, we're a few hundreds away from hitting 50K subscribers recently, especially because of these live streams weekly. We've been receiving upwards of 500 subscribers a day. So this is going to happen. Okay, so might be during this live stream or maybe a few hours later. So it's really exciting. It's a privilege for me to be teaching to such a big audience that is growing every single day. And I get excited every Friday at 3 p.m. to teach you all the things that I have explored, me and my team. And this week, we are going to explore the onboarding screens. But in between those things, we don't want to cover the basics, right? We don't want, just a basic text and a circle or a rectangle. We want to see how do we create this glowy effect, right? This background blur mixed with blur, and how do we create these graphics completely in code? How do we animate it? So this is not just static, and this is the exciting part. So let me show you. I can swipe, boom, to the next one, and see these bubbles they're animating, and all of these bubbles are really all in code. So as I've shown from last week, we've been able to convert SVG into code. And the reason why we're doing that is because we want to save the file size. Usually when you export these things into either PNG or SVG, or maybe not SVG. SVG is pretty good, but for iOS you have to use PDF, and the file size gets really, really big. And it's also not resolution dependent unless you export to 1x, 2x. Now the surprise here is that these graphics is about 1 to 10 KB overall, and on top of that they're separated into multiple layers, which means that we can animate them like this. We can position them. This is really basic. So this is a simple movement animation, and when we switch, it just resets the animation. You can see these planets, they're moving. The stars, they're appearing. I didn't spend a whole lot of time, so this is super basic at the moment, but it works. And on top of that, it's dynamic, so I can switch back and forth. And it's really fun. This is exactly what we're gonna be exploring today. And so let me just minimize this. And let's take a look at the design here. Now, the thing is, when I show this design to a lot of designers and developers, they tend to think that this is quite far-fetched and it's quite difficult to implement, and it's not going to make it to the deadline. And we have a limitation of budget, a limitation of talent, a limitation of whatever. But when you know how to code, as we explained in the past, you can overcome these things, and you can spend way less time, and you can collaborate better, and you can use each and everyone's talent in their, in a way that we can combine. So for example, what I told my team was, hey, what if you spend hours this week to recreate these shapes into code so that we can customize it in code, the colors, the gradients, the angular gradients, and just focus on the background. It doesn't require that much expertise. The same with these graphics, these planets. So that's exactly what my team did, and they did a phenomenal job, which is why we're able to get these results here. So I put all of these graphics into files here, and you can see each of these graphics are essentially shapes, okay? And it's not impossible for anyone with a limited amount of experience in Xcode to learn these things. As long as you show them exactly the steps to do that and let them apply their aesthetic sense. So if they're a designer, they understand because they created these things, right? They create these things in Figma. They know how it works, the positioning, the sizing, the colors, and everything. You just need to tell them, how do you do that in code? How do you transport that in code instead of doing it the lazy way, which is to export everything and merge everything into a single image? So that's exactly what we did. So we have a bunch of shape here. And, you know, I've shown you, it's in the description, by the way. We have this resource where you can convert SVG code into Swift code, right? So any shape that you see here, you can copy as SVG, and then you can paste that and convert to Swift. So this is easy. Once they have the shape, then they can start coloring everything. Now, once they have done that, then we get into the more, you know, nitty-gritty stuff. So let me just get this here. I believe it's inside the face. Yeah, we have a lot of files, of course, and you know, we're still new, so there's a lot of naming convention that are not completely applied correctly. This is a learning experience, and you know, this is where we need to work together. And we're like, okay, well, let's set a naming convention for our files, and you know, let's make sure that it doesn't conflict. But again, these are details. Let's focus on the results here. And so you can see the face graphics is using all of these shapes, okay? The stars, the lines, as I've shown you here, the planet. And a lot of these are kind of like into mini components. So for example, you have the planet, and then the planet is using ellipses and, you know, and different shapes. And then the Saturn ring. The ring here is not being previewed, but you know, you can see that we're using all the shapes and then we're coloring those shapes, okay? And with many, many hours later, you get into a really fantastic result. Yes, so the webcam is not working. I have to disconnect and connect it again, so give me 1 second. All right, I'm back. Hopefully it works. All right, as you can see here, we have you know, all of these amazing graphics completely done in code, which means that if I look at the file size, look at this. You know, each of these are about 1 or 2 KB, right? This is completely dependent on how much code that you have. And you compare that to, let's say, a PNG file, which is completely static and completely merged, then you have something that is fantastic. On top of that, what we try to do, and I'm going to show you this because I find this to be an important workflow, we made sure that all of these backgrounds can adapt to the biggest screen possible. So I thought, well, you know, let's be future-proof. Let's make sure that this eventually works on Apple TV, for example, if we decide to make an Apple TV app, or on the iPad 13-inch, which has a resolution of maximum 1366. So as a result, you want to create these backgrounds and these shapes to be centered, because that's how SwiftUI works. Every UI is set from the center. I'm going to show you the implementation later, but I just want to start from the workflow first. And so my designers are essentially creating all of these shapes based on the assumption that it will be used for bigger screens. So just to give you an idea of how it looks like on a bigger screen. So for example, the wave here. And this was one hurdle that we had, was like, okay, well, if your phone is set in landscape mode, or if you go to the iPad, then the shape is going to be cut right here. So I thought, well, let's make sure that we have the fullest resolution possible. So if I switch to the iPad, I should have switched to the other one. Some of these devices are preloaded, so it's going to be faster, but you can see it looks exactly like this on the iPad, which means that it's going to work for some of the biggest resolutions out there. And that's exactly what we try to do. By the way, this is not different from working on the web, for example. So when you work on the web, you have to make sure that your website has a background like this that is going to fit inside the biggest screen possible. In fact, the web, I would say, is even crazier than this. You know, you would have to take care of a resolution of 3000 because now we have a 6K resolution, Pro XDR display. And so if you maximize the screen for your website, and this is also another hurdle that we had for DesignCode, is that, if you have like a super huge resolution desktop, then you have to make sure that all of these shapes are going to be able to work on all of these big resolutions. And this takes a lot of time and implementation to get right. But like I said, you don't have to do it as a developer. You can ask your designer to do it as long as they welcome the idea of being part of that workflow. And of course, this is a lot about the teamwork. So all of these backgrounds, all of these shapes will be centered position and can work on any screen resolution possible, right? That's important. Now, let's take a look at some of the basic code. So today we're going to learn exactly that, and we're going to learn how to do a basic layout like this. Now, we can't get to every single detail, but we can get to this point where we're setting a tab view, and then we're going to set like the tab view style, and we're going to be able to swipe, and you're going to be able to like set different animations, and we're going to explore the outline, the background blur, the masking effects, the text gradients, and all of that stuff. Sounds good? So before we get started, I just want to say thank you for being here. And if you like these streams, please give a thumbs up. It helps so much to get this content out there, to get into the eyes of more people who may be interested in design and code and use this as a career path and eventually find a job, or either as a designer or as an iOS developer and web developer. And I think that this can be really useful to a whole lot of people. So, with your like and your subscription is going to help us a lot. And yeah, so let's get started. We have the design, and I like to start from scratch. Another little thing I want to say is that these streams are not always 100%, butter smooth. Okay, so when you do live coding is a very difficult thing to do. Okay, regardless of how much experience that you have. So please be patient. Sometimes I will get into problems, and it's not that I don't know it or that I don't know the solution, is that sometimes it requires a lot of debugging time, and I don't want to bore you and try to kind of retrace my steps and finding and then confusing you. So sometimes I decide to skip some of these steps because they they would get in the way of your learning. So that's all. And let's be patient, let's have fun, and let's learn as much as possible together. So let's start with this layout here. I love to think of Xcode as a really good prototyping tool, and every time that I work with it, that's exactly what we do. So we're gonna start with the title here, and it's going to be learn design code. Okay, make sure that there's no space, and now you have your title. We're gonna set this to the dynamic type, which is font large title, and then we're gonna set to bold. Okay, now we want to set more, so we're gonna set this into a VStack, and then we have two more texts, so 120 hours of videos. And now we're also gonna set The font, I believe this one is gonna be subheadline, if I'm not mistaken. So 13, definitely get used to all the dynamic types. So for example, 13 is gonna be cal out, or I believe there's another name for it, the subhead. And get used to all of these values, because these values are going to help you so much when you're going to be designing and developing. A lot of designers, they think that every single font size is custom made. Yes, if you have a lot of experience with that, but it does help to know the different the standards for the font size. Especially it helps to know the dynamic type, which is going to help you with the accessibility options. So I try to use it for every single of these texts to use dynamic type sizes. So large title is going to be 34, and in 15, I believe, I don't remember them by heart, but this is subhead, and this one is, I believe, subhead as well. Let's just make sure that I have it correct. Or footnote. So footnote. All right. Footnote, and we're gonna set this one to font weight semi-bold. Then we're gonna set another one for the third text, and this is going to be sub-headline, and boom. So if you want to align this to the left, we're gonna set alignment leading, and we also want to set some spacing to 16. So again, divisible by 4 as much as possible. Typically, 16 is the most used value in terms of padding in iOS. In fact, if you don't set any padding at all, the default is going to be 16. So like this, for example. All right, so this is the design that we have so far. Let's get this into the card, and we are going to use, again, SwiftUI Inspector. I've been telling you guys a lot about this tool, which is amazing. So we're gonna get simply the colors of the gradient, and I like to be able to do this quickly because it takes a lot of time to code the gradient. So what I'm gonna do here is after the padding, I'm gonna set a background, and then I'm gonna paste my gradient. So yes, that's correct. Just want to make sure that I'm doing it correctly. And we can add another padding, and let's set it to 20 this time, or even 30. 20. And then the padding here is going to be 30, just like in the design. So 30, roughly. I don't want to get too much into the details, but that's roughly it. And then 20 from here. And so we have the card. And again, I explained multiple times about the ordering. So it's make sure to set the corner radius. We're going to set not corner radius, because we're going to use the Apple corner radius. And it's going to use a mask, rounded rectangle, using corner radius with style. We're going to set it to 30 and continuous. So this is roughly what we have in terms of the card. And what is going on here? I don't think that I haven't made a mistake. Let's see. Oh, sorry. I use corner size, and sometimes the auto completion is definitely in the way. So corner radius. All right, so make sure to use corner radius. The other one is using CG size, so it's different. Now this should be good. And before we get into the outline and stuff like that, I want to show you how to use the tab view and how to do those swiping cards. This is super simple. So what we're going to do here is, first we're going to create a subview out of this. But before creating a subview, you're going to need a parent container. In this case, I'm going to use a Z-stack. Z-stack is great because if you want to have like a background or something like that, then you want to use a Z-stack and overlap things together. And now I'm going to put this and extract subview. I'm going to use a different name. So let's say onboarding card view. So notice that it applying to both at the same time, which is kind of awesome. And now it creates my component. And so imagine that each card can be swiped. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put this inside a VStack first, and I'm going to change the VStack to tab view. Okay. Now, what is the tab view? The tab view is essentially what you would use for your tab bar, and you have like multiple menus, but you can also use that for creating these pagination. So you're going to need to use tab view style, and by default it's going to be the default tab view. Now, this is another thing that a lot of people don't pay enough attention to, is how to check the documentation in Xcode, right? And you know, your best friend is the option key, and you have this question mark. Click on it, and you're gonna get the summary of it. You're gonna get some code sample, and from this, it's gonna teach you so much about all the things you can do in Xcode, and definitely take a lot of time exploring those things. So in this case, I want to know what are the different tab view styles. So I'm gonna click on it, and then it's gonna give me the full explanation, you know, where it's available in terms of the different platforms such as iOS, macOS, and also the different styles. So in this case, I want to use the page tab view style. So let me just copy this. And again, you can search, like, it's fantastic. Documentation in Xcode is fantastic. So I'm going to replace this by the page view style, page tab view style. And when I do that, then I have access to my beautiful, you know, pagination. Now, since I don't have multiple cards, I don't have it yet. So let me get 3 cards. Okay. And then boom, look at that. That's all I need to do. Apple is like completely spoiling us as developers and designers in terms of like being able to do this cool UI with just a few lines of code. This is why I love SwiftUI. So yeah, if you enjoy these techniques, give a thumbs up and just comment and say, you know, this is really cool. I'm learning something today. Really appreciate it. So, all right. Now we're gonna take care of the background. So the background, we're gonna check the gradient first. So this is the gradient. I just want to make sure that I'm selecting the right thing. Let's take a look at this one. All right, so this one is using this gradient, and I'm gonna copy the code, and I'm gonna paste it right here. So yes, I'm gonna get into stroke and overlay, but first let me take care of the background, because if we don't have the background, you don't see these little dots, and yeah, you're missing out because these dots are amazing. It's part of the tab view style. So we have the background. I'm also going to use ignore save area, and so it's taking the full screen, including the notch, and I'm going to, yes, so I'm also going to set this into a mini component because I don't want this huge piece of code to be in the way of my structure. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a background component of type SomeView, and I'm going to put my gradient right there. Okay, so let's resume this. Should work. Oh yeah, of course, you have to include it, right? So it's called background, and voila. Now, this is where we're gonna start using the shapes that our designers have created. And what we're gonna do here is, first of all, I'm gonna put this into a Z stack first, so I can show you the problem that we're gonna face. The background itself is called wave, parentheses. It's one of the graphics here, okay? And yeah, we can take a look at it. So wave is a linear gradient using a mask, and a mask is using the shape, which I've shown you earlier. And again, everything is in code, and you can customize the offset, the width, the height, and everything is centered, which means it's going to work against any screen size, which is beautiful. So you know, you can also change all of these colors in code, which means you can animate them, you can make them dynamic, you can use data. And so that's awesome. If you're a developer, this is your dream, right? Like you want to make sure that everything that you have here can be made dynamic using data. And that's exactly what we can do when we're not using, like, let's say a PDF file, right? So so this is our wave, and what you're noticing here is that if I'm using the wave as it is using the maximum size. It's kind of like pushing everything. And and you don't want to do that. You don't want to push everything because it's going to make it so that your tab view UI is also going to follow that size. And that's exactly what we want to avoid. So instead of doing that, if you don't want to make it use the full size, you can do something called overlay, and then you put the wave inside, and boom. And maybe not overlay, since you want to put it in the background. So it depends if you want to put it in the above or below the linear gradient. Yes, overlay is correct because I want to put it above the gradient. If I put it as a background, it's going to be below the gradient, which means that it's not going to be showing. Okay, and then since I'm using the overlay method, I don't need my Z stack anymore. And if I want to use multiple backgrounds, then I'm gonna need, so let's say I want to use a second background called wave1 parentheses, and it's not gonna allow me because I'm gonna need to put this inside a Z stack first. So let me put this into a Z stack, and then boom, we have two backgrounds, one on top of another. So we have the first wave, and then we have the second wave. Okay, so that's how you set up the background. And yeah, now that we have the beautiful three dots here, okay, so you see how these lights are changing when I switch. Now I also want to be able to make this into the UI that we see here. The first thing I want to show you is how to set the text gradient. So you've seen it in the code. Essentially, we're using the gradient first, and then we're using the mask later. And if I remember correctly, that's exactly how you do it in CSS. So I have a question here. Do you use light mode or dark mode colors? Typically, most of your colors are going to be set in the assets catalog for light and dark mode. Now, it's not like, it depends where you want to take your UI. Sometimes I do believe that you don't necessarily need for everything to have light and dark mode. So for example, what I decided for this design is that some of these modals and these windows don't need a light mode version, okay? And in fact, you can get away with creating a dark mode UI and then not take care of the light mode at all. The light mode, I think it's important nowadays to have a dark mode UI, because if it's really late, there's very little light, you're on your bed, dark mode is so useful. But when you have a lot of colors like this still work well even during the daytime, right? And so to me, we decided that we're not going to take care of the light mode yet, so we're just going to have the dark mode for some of these layers. But for some of these backgrounds and some of these main UIs, we will have a light mode version though. So for example, this is kind of the light mode version, right? So this is the light mode version, and but for the like these modals here, we're gonna keep the dark mode, or these popover, we're gonna keep the dark mode, and we're not gonna change it to light mode. So that's kind of the decision that we have decided. So now back to this, I'm gonna do my text gradient, and yes, it's here. So first of all, I'm gonna need the gradient. Let me go back to my UI here. I'm gonna select the text, and I'm gonna copy the gradient code. Then I'm going to paste that gradient right here. So now, because it's a shape, it's going to push everything to the maximum. So what I need to do is to set a frame size, especially for the height. So we're going to set the height, let's say, to 140. Now what we're going to do is that we're going to use the gradient as the content, and we're going to use the text as the mask. So let me just cut this text, and I'm going to use .mask and then paste the text inside it. Boom. See that? This is how you do text gradient, and it's quite easy. And in fact, using the mask, you can do anything with that. You know, you can use a circle, you can use any shape that you want. In this case, we're actually using a text, which is super interesting. So I also want to set it to 3 lines of text. So there are several ways to do. Either you can set a frame size and make sure to do that, or you can also do a little bit of a hack, and you can set the non-breaking space right here, like this. Now the text is going to be centered within its frame, which means that we're going to set the frame and set the alignment of the frame. So we're going to set max width first, and then alignment to leading. So now it's going to go to the left side. Oh yes, another thing about orderings, super important. The font has to be right after the text and not after the frame modifier. So a lot of people are going to make this mistake when they're starting out in SwiftUI, but you know, you get used to it. It makes a lot of sense. So now I have my gradient here, and now I'm going to set the color. Foreground color.white. I'm going to use opacity 0.8 or 0.7, and I'm going to do the same for the second text, and voila. Awesome. So far so good. We're already at 30 minutes, so we have a lot more time. And now I'm going to set the outline. So notice that the outline here, using the same technique, it's using an overlay effect. So it's taking the color of the background, and it's also using a gradient alpha. So, and also it has a glow, which is kind of cool. And you know, in SwiftUI, it's quite not that difficult. So the first thing is I'm going to take a look at my container. So this is my container. Okay. And I need to make sure that we are after the mask, because remember, the mask is clipping everything, which means that we need to set it here. And I'm going to use an overlay. The overlay is going to use exactly the same shape as the rounded rectangle of my mask. Okay? And when I do that, you're going to see that my rounded rectangle here is set to a shape of the size of my container. Okay? And this is where you can set, let me just set the indentation. We can set to stroke because we only want the outline. And so we're turning a shape into a stroke, which means that we have the outline, and we can also change the color using the stroke to, let's say, white. Okay. Now we have the outline with the white, and we can also like customize the line width. Sometimes you can use 0.5. This is more like a hairline. You see that on iOS, they do that a lot. They have some hairlines that are super thin, thinner than 1 pixel or 1 point, sorry. And you can definitely use 0.5 for that. But otherwise, you can also use 1, that's fine. Now, for the gradient, we are going to use the gradient instead of a color. So everything can be customized. So let me start with this one. And is it this one? I think it's this one. But otherwise, I can start from scratch as well if it's not the right one. So my linear gradient, okay. So when I do that, it's basically a gradient that has 100% white to 0% white. So that's how we get this gradual gradient that we have here, and we're using the stroke, okay? And that's just fantastic. So it creates this beautiful effect here. On top of that, you can also apply a blending mode on this shape, which is the round rectangle. One key trick that I like to use is like double clicking on the parentheses to see when it ends. So after stroke, I'm going to use blend mode, and I can use overlay. So this is going to make my outline to use a blend mode, which is really cool when you're able to do that and you have like beautiful colors in the background. So it creates a very nice, it's just like the same UI that when you do Hey Siri and then you have these results and the texts are more vibrant, it's using vibrancy, it's using blending modes. And that's why we use blending mode right here. Now for the glow, it's essentially the same technique. You can definitely copy and paste the same code over and over. And for example, I want to use the overlay, and the overlay is using the exact same round rectangle, and I'm going to apply that to nesting that essentially. So now I have a second overlay, and instead of using blend mode, or I can also keep using blend mode, that's fine, but let me replace this by blur instead. And we can set it to, let's say 5 so that we can see it. There you go. So now you have this glow of your outline, which is beautiful. And if you want to make it more visible, we can definitely set, the line width to be bigger. So now you can make it more visible, because the more weight that your line width has, then the more impact that it has on the glow, on the blur. And so you can set it to 10, let's say. So now I have my beautiful glow here. And of course you can play with the opacity and so on. And yeah, that's how we get this beautiful effect here. You can play with the line width to get a stronger glow, right? And a lot of fun. If you're a designer, this is right up your alley. I know developers, if you're interested in design, this is also something that you're gonna have a lot of fun with. Now, let's talk about the background blur, because this is an interesting one. And when I designed this, I realized that it was gonna be a challenge to create this gradual background blur, because if you think about it, we know that we can create a background blur with a full, opacity on all sides, but to be able to do it gradually is impossible. So I had to figure out a way to do that, and to achieve a similar result, not exactly the same, but it works. So you can see here, it's blurring the background. So the technique that I'm using, this is something that I shared recently on Twitter. It's to combine blur and background blur together. And that's really interesting, because that's what creates like beautiful effects that you're gonna see on Stripe. Of course, not as good, or because when you have these shapes here, it's either you have a full shape, or sometimes you have part of the shape that is blurred, and that's something that I wanted to figure out how to do it. And sure, you can go the Stripe way. Actually, I don't know how they did it, but they probably use WebGL or something very complex, or sometimes you can use like libraries and stuff like that. But I like to figure out like inexpensive ways to achieve similar result. Maybe not as fancy, but definitely cool looking to some extent, right? And again, this depends on how you're able to to spend your time into researching these things. But this is from my experience, and I have to think about efficiency as well. I have to think about the time that I have to spend on learning these things. So the way I'm gonna do it, I'm gonna use a background, and the background is gonna use a blur sheet. And in order to use the blur sheet, as I've shown in the past, is to use a library called, I already installed that one for
for time saving. So it's called SwiftUI X. I'm going to import that. And when I import that, I'm going to be able to use visual effect blur view. And I can use one of the styles. So system material is what sets light mode and dark mode automatically, or you can use the specific one that is light or dark, and you have multiple variations of thickness from ultra thin to ultra thick. And in this case, I'm going to use ultra thin material dark, and it's going to look like this. So by default, it's set to blue, and now we have our background blur. It's not going to show properly until you press on play, by the way. And there you go. So I think I put it in the wrong place. I'm going to put it here instead. Right. So I'm putting it below the text. And now I'm going to make sure that I have the background blur with the corner radius. So I'm going to use mask, rounded rectangle, corner radius, not corner size. And it's going to be 30, continuous. And voila. So the challenge that we have here is how do we create that, that gradient alpha. So I'm going to show you what doesn't work, and I've tried it. So you can definitely try to use, let's say, use a mask on the background blur. And the background blur using the mask could be using a gradient. Okay, so I just want to make sure that I don't waste your time here, but let's see if we can do this quickly. And okay, let me click on the plus sign, and the speed is not helping, by the way. So okay, it's on my second monitor, and we're gonna set linear gradient. So if I set the opacity, because that's what masking is all about, right? So to be able to mask using opacity, you're gonna see that it removes our blur. Does it? Wait a second. I'm not sure. That's actually interesting because I definitely tried it, but it seems to be working. Okay, this is really interesting because I'm pretty sure I tried it and it wasn't working properly. Okay, let's see if it actually blurs. So it does seem to be blurring. Okay, that's awesome. So mask, round rectangle, fill, linear gradient, top 100%, bottom 0% opacity, and it does work. So that solved one of my problems. So awesome. You can also like add more colors to your gradient. So for example, if you want the 100% to be separated by 3 colors, so now we have the 100% blur right here separated in 3 parts. So that actually works. That's really awesome. All right, well, I was gonna do the other way, which is equally awesome, okay? And but this is fantastic. Let's move on, and we can do the other way on the bigger one. So we have 2 layers, and the idea was I wanted to put the graphics behind this one, but above the background layer. And I wanted to create this beautiful kind of blending effect of the 2 cards together. And that's why we needed the gradual thing. And so, all right, so let's create the second. Now, first of all, let me just maximize the space here. And I'm going to put this inside a VStack. So I have a second container, and the second container is also going to have the background modifier with padding. So let me try that. I mean, once you get used to SwiftUI, you get used to the idea of modifiers and how to move them around. It's really fun. It really saves a lot of time. And so in this case, I have the background. I also want to use the outlines. So I'm going to use the whole overlay and the whole linear gradient as well. So we're saving a lot of time right now. And so instead of from top to bottom, I'm going to use from bottom to top. So I'm gonna change the stops of my gradient. So this one is going to be opacity 0. Okay. And so it's from the bottom, and the outline is going to be the other way as well. So let me cut this, put this here, cut. I'm just moving the color, the color literals. Okay, so this is for the gradient. I'm gonna do the same here. Okay. And make sure that I have the right one. Okay. So the outline is from bottom to top. And now we have the gradient. So let me I just want to make sure that I'm not lost in my code here. Because especially with gradients, it's quite easy to get lost. And all right, so overlay, background. Well, anyways, I have my background, okay, and this should be after. Okay, so we're starting with this, and I'm gonna put this here. Now, what I want to show you is that instead of doing this, we're going to use the other technique. So remember that we have a background, and it's fully, it's just full. And we're going to make sure that we have the rounded corners. All right, it's getting a little bit slow. Not good. Let me just get this code here. All right, so I have my rounded corner. Now, instead of using this technique, which is using the mask, okay, I'm going to use blur. This might be a little bit more performance heavy, by the way, so just need to make sure that you understand the cost of some of these techniques. And another thing that I'm going to do is setting the padding from the bottom. Maybe 60. Definitely maybe not. Yeah, we just need to set the ordering properly. So, we have a bigger card here. Of course, I can use like a size. I'm deviating a little bit because I definitely did not expect for this to work. So it kind of got me off guard in a positive way, but sometimes it doesn't always work the way that you anticipated. So, okay, so we have this so far, and instead of using the masking, now we're using a blur plus the visual effect blur. And so what is interesting about this is that let me just, set the offset and show you the result. So now I'm simply moving that so you can see that it's blurring whatever background that you have. And especially when we're going to have some sort of a graphic in the background. But you can see that, it's achieving the same effect. It's also achieving the, the gradual alpha masking here. And that's exactly what we want. So it's two different techniques, but achieving the same result. Now, next, we're going to get into the graphics. So this is a full graphic created in code, and we're going to apply that right here. So let me put that as a background to the tab view. And the graphic itself is called face graphic. And I'm not sure why it's not working. Oh yeah, okay, yeah, sure. So that's because I set up some dynamic stuff. So I might want to set the selection. Let me just solve this quickly first with some binding. You don't have to take care of this one for now. I'm just going to use a constant to 0 for now. Okay, so this is my graphics, and it's already animated. And the animation is really simple. So the face graphic itself, as I've shown you, is essentially just like any image, and you're using a background of all the cards. And so if I swipe this, yeah, so if I swipe this, the background remains because the tab view is what controls the interactions of the cards. And so if you're adding a background, the background doesn't change itself, but the cards are going to move. Okay? Let me just fix my my camera again. Okay. This is the last time. Next time I'm just going to close my camera. But we're almost there. So we have our cards. Obviously missing the details, some of the details. Again, I'm going to share the source file so you can explore this later with all the interactions, with all the animations, and at least you know where to start. And that's the most important part. Understanding the workflow, understanding the techniques from scratch, you know, with some directions. And then if you want to explore more into how I did this or that, you look into the source file and then you figure out, okay, this is actually pretty easy. So in terms of the graphics, I'm putting it as a background to the tab view, which is what controls these cards. And I'm just losing my train of thoughts. Let me, okay, so the graphics. So, you know, I'm not going to get into the data because the data is quite easy. If you have taken my course or if you have taken any tutorial about SwiftUI, you know that with any component, you can set the variable and you can replace it and you can pass the variable, the values to that component. And so for each of these cards, you're going to be able to set different content for each of these components. And so that part, you know, you're going to find tutorials everywhere online. What I want to focus on is on the techniques that you're not going to find anywhere online because not enough people explore these things. So let me just get into so the face graphics. Yes, how to do the animation. So for your designer, what you want to do is that tell them, okay, you want to create this component and you want to set the animation on this component. So maybe I can start from scratch. Maybe if it doesn't go wrong, okay? Let's just cross fingers because when I do these things, it doesn't always work perfectly. So please be patient. I like to be able to show you from scratch. So I'm just going to remove some of these code. It's really simple animation values here. And I think that's it. It's going to give me an error because I'm passing the argument here. So I can definitely remove this argument. And I believe that we should be good. So, oh yes, of course, the other one. Sorry, Yes, this is what happens when I try to show people from scratch. Doesn't always work perfectly. So we also have more code here. All right, hopefully this is all. Oh yes, we have the preview. All right, let's cross fingers. In the meantime, if you have any question, I can answer them at the end of the stream. So any question you can ask, and I'm gonna be able to help you if the question is in my alley. So all right, this is what your designer is gonna be working on, as I explained in the last live stream. They're gonna be converting the shapes. They're gonna be using a gradient, and then they're gonna be using a mask and to color that shape, and they can compose it. They can align it in the center, and then from there, as long as it fits any resolution possible, you can fit that into your UI as an engineer, as a designer who codes, and it's beautiful, right? You want to be able to let them do their thing, and you can do your thing, and the two worlds combined creates a beautiful piece of art. Well, to some extent, because there's a lot of functionalities here. So, all right, now we want to tell them how to animate. So let's say they have this face graphic here, and we want to tell them, okay, go crazy with the animations. We're going to start with a state var, and we're going to start with appear. So when appear means that when the view is seen, it's going to change the state, or it's going to, yeah, it's an event when the view is seen, whatever element that you have. Excuse me. So I have my state, and now I just need to figure out where to put my event. So I'm gonna click on the Z stack, and right after the Z stack, I'm gonna set on appear as the event itself. And so on appear, when the view is being seen, I'm going to change my state to true. And using this state change, I'm going to be able to animate my UI. And that's it. So from this state change, I can set the beginning and the end state of my animation. Let's start with a simple one. Let's see the yellow planet. So the yellow planet is right here, is using an offset. My designer was able to recreate this in code, color it, and set the offset so that it's composed in a way that looks exactly or almost exactly like in Figma. So now they're gonna be able to animate it. So I'm gonna do appear question mark, and at the end, so the end state is going to be whatever they have. Otherwise, set it to 0. So now it doesn't have any transition. So it's simply going to jump from one point to another. If you want to add the transition animation, we're gonna do with animation on the state change like this, and we can set one of the animation presets such as linear, ease in, a timing curve, spring, and so on. And we're also going to add a duration. And in this case, I'm going to set it to 10 seconds because I want a slow moving planet. And then my state change to true. So when I do this, and when I click on play, I'm going to see the position change of my planet. And so your designer is going to be the one who's going to be playing with these animations. And so this is the basics of it. And so appear, they can move from right to left. From right to left. So this is the beginning state, and this is the end state. Like 300. Let me just, yeah, one thing you can do is just press space, and it's going to reset the animation. Okay, so maybe 300 is a little bit too far. Let me set it 200. All right. Are we gonna get there? Yes, finally. So we have the planet that is moving, and I can do the same with the other planets. So for example, I can do appear, question mark. So end state, and then, maybe I can move it a little bit more, like this. So this is the purple planet. It's moving a little bit. And I can do the same with the red planet. So appear, question mark, like this. Hours and hours of fun, right? Like, that's just a lot of fun for your designers. Now, when I have this animated, I go back to my content view, or sorry, the onboarding view, and I should be able to see my background that is animated just the way I did it. And it's animated in the background like this, right? So the more complex part, and this is where it might really go wrong, and I hope it's gonna go well, but the gist of it, let me explain the logic behind it. What I want to do is, let me just show you the demo so you understand kind of like what I'm trying to do here. So the idea is that when I change the tab view, the tab card, it changed the selection index, okay? And using the selection index change, I'm changing the background itself. So that's what allows me to change the background when I switch to different cards. So that's the logic aspect. Now, going back into the code, there's one thing that you can do with the tab view is to set a state for selection and attach that. So I'm going to set it to 0 by default. The selection is which card is active, okay? And you're going to attach this to the tab view and set this to selection. Then I'm going to attach that using binding to the tab view. And so let me give you a demo of how it would work. So I'm going to set a text on top of everything, and I'm going to put the selection number. And hopefully you're going to see it right here. So right now you see 0. When I switch, it's still 0. And so one solution that I found was to set the tag to 0 for the first card, tag for the second card, and for the third card. So 0, 1, 2. So now when I change, see the number here is set to 1 instead. Let me make it white so that you can see it. So foreground color dot white. Okay, there you go. So you see 0. When I switch to the other card, it gives me 1. When I switch this to the third card, it gives me 2. Using this number, I can essentially pass that value to each of those graphics and set the animation based on that event change. And so what I'm going to do here is go to the face graphic. Again, this is a little bit more advanced. So the first thing is I'm going to set the binding for the selection. So binding means that you want the value from this component to be in sync with the value of the selection of the parent component, which is the onboarding view. So selection of type integer. And when you set the binding, you're going to have to set the preview. And the preview is going to set the selection. So this is just a default so that your preview works. So the way SwiftUI works is that it needs this piece of code to be able to run the preview based on whatever default values that you have. Otherwise, it's not going to be able to run the preview at all. So in this case, it needs to know what is the selection by default. And this is necessary for the binding. So the binding, set it to here, and now I have to bind this from the parent view, which is onboarding, and I have to pass, remember, selection to the selection state that I have here. So everything is now in sync. So now my face graphic is going to receive that value from from the parent. Okay, and using this value, I'm going to be able to disable, enable the animations and whatever, right? And that's what allows me to change the background and reset the animations on this demo right here. So let's do the next one. Of course, I'm sure there are better ways to do these things, but this is how I found it. So I'm going to set the state and I'm going to say active, and it's going to be, let's say, true by default, if I remember correctly. I just hope that I don't make mistakes. So face graphic and then blob to graphic. So yeah, is active to true by default. Okay. And then what I want to do is just the same way as on appear, I have another event called onChange. And this is a really, really interesting event that you can use in SwiftUI. And the onChange allows you to detect the change of whatever value that you have. In this case, I want to know whenever my selection is changing value, then I can respond based on that change. So, I can decide, for example, I can set active to false and so on. In this case, what I want to do is I want to create a function that is going to manage all of these things together. So I'm going to create a function called update. And in this one, I'm going to say, so this function is going to be called from here. And it's also going to be called from onAppear, because these are two different things. This one says whenever this is being viewed by the user, it's going to run this. This one is like saying when I swipe the card to the second card or back to the first card, this is going to run my update function. Okay, I know it's a little bit more complex. Again, take your time to understand the logic aspect, but as you get more and more familiar with SwiftUI, these are some of the things you're gonna learn to get used to. So first of all, I want to use the selection value to do something about it. So I'm gonna say if selection is equal to 0, so which index value that I'm using, then then make it appear. Otherwise, make it disappear, or set appear is equal to false. And the same with, let me see. I just want to make sure that I'm not making a mistake here. The second thing that I want to do, so this is different animations. This has a different duration, linear animation, and so on. The other one can, let me just reference. Yeah, I knew I shouldn't have done this, but I hope it's useful. So selection, and then with animation, yes, I'm also using active. The reason why I'm using active is so that I make it fade in and fade out. So that's how I'm able to disable the background and switch to the other one. So we have the appear, which is used to start the animation, and then we have the active to be able to fade in and fade out the whole face graphic and the whole blob graphic. So, again, different types of animations. So with animation, and then I'm going to do active is equal to true, and then active is equal to false. So the selection is like saying, okay, which card is being selected from the parent? And this is saying 0 being the first card. So if this is the first card, then show this background right here. If not, make it disappear. And so I'm also going to use the active. And in this case, I'm going to simplify everything. I'm going to use the opacity modifier. And I'm going to say, is this active? If yes, set the opacity to 1. Otherwise, set the opacity to 0. So fade out. And now that I'm also using the with animation, which allows me to fade in and fade out between those backgrounds. So if this goes well, I'm going to go back to onboarding. doing live, so a lot of things can go wrong for sure. Boom, see that? Beautiful. I was really lucky here because I was scared that I would not work. But this is the goal, right? The goal is that you go to the second card and you change the background. You go to the third card, you're passing the selection back and forth, you're binding it, you're synchronizing that value, and all your designers need to do is going back here and they're like, okay, I have two states. The first one is appear and I can animate my planets, I can animate my lines, and the second one is how do you want to animate when your face disappears, when your graphic disappears. You can decide to use an offset value, you can use a transform value, you can use a rotation value, whatever it is, you have control because you have these two events, these two states that gives you that superpower. And so, yeah, that's it. And the rest is just to say, I'm gonna put 3 backgrounds instead of 2. So first I'm gonna put this into a Z stack, and then I'm gonna put the other graphic, so blob 1, selection, and blob 2, and then pass the selection. Again, super important to pass the selection so that this graphic knows which card is being selected. Therefore, when I switch, it changed the background, and then change the background again, and back and forth. Right? Beautiful. So, yeah, whew. I hope you enjoyed it. This was not planned, but I really wanted to show you how I managed to do this effect. Of course, in terms of the details, the design and all that stuff, you can definitely do it yourself. It's a lot of fun as a designer. You can definitely play a lot with this. So again, I'm going to be sharing the source files to these, including the one that we're doing live and also the one that I prepared before doing live. So it has slightly different UI. Some things I was deviating a little bit, and yeah, a live stream. What can you do, right? I'm doing my best, and I'm trying to teach as much as I can. So again, if you really enjoyed these things, these live stream, these techniques, and these explanations, please give a thumbs up. I really appreciate you listening and and having fun and exploring together on these things. So let me see. I'm gonna answer some questions, and then we can call it a day. So we have some questions here. SwiftUI documentation is very short. I see a comment here. Yes, it has some of the elements, especially the more obscure elements, tend to have more shorter documentation. But what I can say is that since SwiftUI 2, the documentation has improved tremendously. And I'm anticipating that in a couple of months with SwiftUI 3, it's going to get even better. So, and of course, you can Google all of these things, and Apple has the documentation online on top of what is available inside Xcode. Can you use an overlay and then use the stroke modifier? So the stroke has to be applied to a shape. So you would have to put the shape inside your overlay and then the stroke modify to your shape. And that's kind of like the logic of it. Some modifiers are compatible with some things. You can't use a modify on a modifier. You can use a modify on a shape or a stack. And some of the modifiers such as fill is only available to a shape, or a font is not going to be available after a frame. So there's a lot of these small detail logic that you will get used to, and it's going to make a lot of sense. Do you use light color mode? So I already answered this one. Any design tutorial? So we have a lot of live streams about UI design, and I've been doing that a lot over the past few weeks. And I urge you to take a look if you want to learn design. We learn the same things here, except in Figma instead of Xcode. And of course, I have a lot of courses in the description. UI design, UI design handbook, iOS design, design system in Figma, UI design for developers, a lot of resources that you can learn for both designers and developers, because as a designer who codes, all my content is made for anyone who can understand code or design at the same time. So a developer can definitely take a lot of benefit from this perspective. So do you have a video specifically on the wave? So the wave is, you know, is yes, I mean, I covered that multiple times in my live stream, but you can either go to the plugins, and there's a bunch of plugins called like Get Waves and stuff like that, or you can design it from scratch if you want. So if you want to design it from scratch, it's going to take more time and patience for sure. But let me see. Yes, I have to go to edit mode first, and then you use the bend tool. The bend tool allows you to bend some of these things, and then you want to play with, these Bezier curves, and apply the bend tool again. And so you create these beautiful shape, and then you put that in the background. So at the end of the day, once you're done with this, you copy SVG and you turn that into Swift code so that you can color it using gradient and mask in your SwiftUI file. So yeah, like I said, the beginning is very simple, and I think most people are able to follow the beginning. But of course, we want to get to a point where you know exactly how to do this UI here. And so when you get to that portion, you need to spend a little bit more time on the logic aspect. If you have done code in the past, such as CSS and JavaScript, I don't think this is too complicated. But if you never coded before, start with the basic parts, start with the graphics, start with the modifiers, and then eventually you can move into the more complex aspects, such as the binding, the state. And again, if you have developer friends, they can help you with this. Again, I have a lot of tutorials. We just recently got to 85 SwiftUI videos and a lot more coming. So we have a lot of exciting contents. All right, so making a plugin, no. Can you create an app visually dragging text boxes and card view and ads, or no? I'm not sure what you mean, but I think you can basically do anything in SwiftUI or Flutter or any of these programming languages and platform and UI kit, and frameworks. So yeah, I think that's it. Again, thank you so much for coming to this live stream, and we do these every single week on Friday at 3 p.m. So if you enjoy these, please give a like and a subscribe, and click on the bell notification so that you know and receive a notification when it's going to run next week at 3 p.m. on Friday. So I'll see you next time. Bye bye.